Hi, everybody. It is great to be back. I have missed you guys. So we're going to give everybody just a little bit of time to get in here and get settled. This, like I always say, because I really love all the subjects that I do, and I like to make deep dives and give you some information that you might not normally come across with a 30-minute podcast or something like that. So I like to do the deep dive. And I've been sitting on this one for a really long time. And I figured, hey, this will be a good time to pull this one out of my bag of tricks to talk about. Plus, it's like a lot of extensive research and things like that regarding this particular subject. So if you like deep dives and you like rabbit holes, oh my goodness, this is like a piece of Swiss cheese. And I'm going to warn you, if you get hooked on this subject, it is addictive. But we're going to give everybody, like I said, just a couple of moments to get in. When you do get in, say hello. Let me know you're here. And once we give it a couple more minutes, we'll go ahead and get started. So there's Mikey, and Mikey says, hi, Odd Mother. Hi, everybody. Hey, Mikey, so glad to have you here. And then Stephen P. Kitty Cat is here. And he says, meow, I'm on time for once. Yay! And then Liz is here as well. And she says, hello, everybody. So, yeah, we're super excited to be doing this tonight. Hi, Raven. How are you? Raven says hello. All right. So we'll go ahead and, we've got someone. Now, Lewis, are you new? If you are, please let us know where you're from. We always like to have new people here in the crypt. And if you're a return visitor, thank you very much for coming back. Tonight's going to be a fun one. Tonight is also going to be one of those episodes that, like one of those movies you really need to pay attention to because there's so many rabbit holes. And Ange says, hi, Odd Mother. Hello, Ange. How are you doing? And guys, if you would please share out. We're going to go ahead and do some house cleaning. Hi, John. How are you? John says, hello, Mother. But we're going to go ahead and do some house cleaning. Again, Facebook is getting extremely aggressive with groups that have a healthy organic reach and following. So they really start putting the pressure on you as far as how much they let your stuff be seen in people's feeds, even people that subscribe. I think that's probably one of the reasons they've gone to the whole YouTube thing to where you need to also hit the bell. But sometimes that's not a guarantee. And I know this from personal experience on other podcasts and things that are here on Facebook. Sometimes I don't always get the notifications. So please share out to anyone that you know is normally here, or to some groups or friends that you think might find this interesting. Let's see, like and share. Also go to our website, sign up for the newsletter. I'm not sure if we're going to be doing a newsletter this month, just because we're really gearing up for September and we've all been extremely busy. And then Lewis says, no, he's a return from Maryland. Well, so glad to have you back here, Lewis. So glad to have you back here. Also, go to our YouTube, like our YouTube, which you can also do from our website. And speaking of website, in the members area, we do have an uncensored chat that we are live in right now. And I've got the little thing pulled up right here. So I can see people chatting over there as well. Again, I know you guys are all adults, behave as such. and no one will step in to do anything. So we're not Zuck, we're not YouTube. Just be an adult about it. We also have the website watch page where you can go and watch past episodes of any particular show for the artists that have opted into that program with us. Also, if you have a business group or product and are looking to advertise with PBDC TV, we now have limited sponsorship spaces available. You can reach us here through Facebook or through our website for more information. And we also have extremely reasonable rates as well as custom packages for like our lives and things like that. Don't forget about Eating Sundays. Those are going to ramp up come September, but we do have it open now, so we're putting stuff on there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started here in just a minute unless Oz sees any more comments. Hi, Kisa. How are you? Glad to have you here. This is going to be a fun one. And then Donald, I'm sorry, Cosmo is here. Hi, Cosmo. Glad to have you here. All right. All right. So let's go ahead and get the legal stuff out of the way. If we can go ahead and throw up the legal advisor on there. Okay. So my feeds, of course, are always for educational purposes. So therefore, under Section 17 USC, Section 107 U.S. Code, Anointed Title 17, Copyrights, Section 107, Limitations on Exclusive Rights, Fair Use. This is fair use. This is notwithstanding the provisions of Section 106 and 106A, the fair use of a copyright work, including such by reproduction in copies or phonorecords or video, or by any other means specified by that section for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, parody, scholarships, research, or education, is not an infringement of copyright. All right. So, on rare occasions, you will find some subjects that have no clear beginning or end, and this is one of them. These often are more related to vague myths and legends, but what if I told you there are some that are actually documented in factual records and documents? Like I said earlier, warning, this rabbit hole can cause addiction. People have been speculating on this subject for centuries. Though some may not be familiar with this historical story, you have most likely been exposed to interpretations of this enigmatic figure, such as if we have anyone that watches Outlander or Castlevania, this particular figure has been the subject of a character in those particular shows. Now, there's a whole lot more. A lot of them are foreign. A lot of them are anime, things like that. So I'm not going to bore you with a really long list. And I quote, "A man who knows everything and who never dies." This was said by Voltaire of the Comte de Saint Germain. So what we're talking about today is the Count Saint Germain. The idea of immortality has always been a source of fascination for the human race. Could it be possible to live forever? And if you could, would you really want to? What problems would you face outliving everyone you cared for and constantly having to adjust to changing times? While historical records prove that the man known as the Count Saint Germain did actually exist, his life seems to defy common sense and appears almost magical. Was he a genius, a charlatan, or was he something altogether different and more? Now, like I said, this is going to be one of those we're going to go back and forth. We're not going to be in present time, but it's going to sound like I'm speaking present time and then kind of doing a little bit of a backstory and then getting back to the main line of the story that we're going to be talking about tonight. This is going to be part one because it's such a large subject. You could actually probably do 3 or 4 subjects on that, or parts, I should say, but we're going to try to keep it to 2. All right, so we can go ahead and we can run the first or the next clip. Now, prior to the 20th century, the normal means of historical information was often kept and recorded in family journals and or collected by chroniclers. And we touched on that a little bit if you've been with me for any length of time when we went over the Great Pestilence, or AKA the Black Plague episodes. A chronicler was someone that went around and actually kind of recorded what was going on. They didn't really have like history books like we have now. They were mostly like aristocratic families keeping family journals and correspondences and things like that. And like I said, as well as written letters and correspondences. And some are still in ownership of these aristocratic families and remain sealed to this day. Now, the Count Saint Germain, most of the information is going to come from the book that you're seeing now. It was written in 1912 by Isabel Cooper Oakley. Now, she was a prominent theosophist, and we're going to get into that more in part 2, but it's kind of a spiritual thing. But she is very good at keeping to facts. Now, you can find her book on ebooks free of charge at globalgraybooks.com/Comte de Saint Germain ebook HTML. So really all you have to do is search for it, and I think they've got a link in Wiki too. Now, she wasn't some fly-by-night, bored housewife or what have you that decided to, write a book. She was actually extremely well educated. She was also one of the first female shopkeepers in London. She was a suffragette. Like I said, she was highly educated. And the letters that she refers to are letters that she directly researched, contacted these families, and was giving the opportunity to actually record some of them. Now, like I said, not all of them have ever been released concerning Count Saint Germain. Some letters concerning the Count, like I said, are still sealed and considered state secrets to this day. Now, Count Saint Germain was known by many names, and you'll find that if you're kind of an armchair historian like I am, and you really like to do some deep research on some of this kind of stuff, he went by, of course, Count Saint Germain, General Weldon or Weldon. He went by Saltykov, the Marquis de Montefort, Comte Bellemare, Chevalier Schoen, Graf Tarzorgi, Prince Ragosi, and in later times known as Major Fraser. Now, the thing about it is this was not uncommon for these times. We're going to be kind of sticking in kind of the 1700s. And for anyone that was a person of means, that were considered of blue blood or royalty and traveled in those particular noble circles, it was not uncommon to go by different names depending on what part of the country you were in. Because things were so politically charged, you wanted to have a safe name, whether it was Protestant and Catholic, or, this king against that king. If you wanted to be able to travel with some degree of safety, it was not uncommon to have different names depending on what area that you lived in or that you were traveling through. Now, Isabel Cooper Oakley did write in here that nearly all the members of the royal families in every country during the last century, and even this, adopted the same practice. But when Monsieur de Saint Germain did so, we have all the small writers of that period and later calling him an adventurer and charlatan for what appeared to have been practically a custom of the time. So let's see what's going on in the comments real quick, and we're going to start in the middle, okay? We really can't start at the beginning. We can't start at the end. We're going to start where most scholars usually start, which will be the mid-1800s. And if you know, the 1800s would actually be the 1700s, just like I'm 147 years old, which means that I'm in my 146th year. So that's how they did it. So let's see what's going on in the comments real quick, and then we'll get into the meat of this. Hi, Lena. How are you? So Lena says hello. We are so glad to have you here. And then John says, does Facebook make you post that now? No, they do not. But we do that because it is, we just feel more comfortable doing that. That way we don't have to argue certain things. So it's just preemptive. So, and then Lena says, I'm good, hun, just fat and growing a baby. Hey, that sounds, congratulations. We love the wee ones around here. We do. So, but welcome to the crypt. And then Kisa says, me, I watch Outlander. Okay, well, then you are probably familiar with the Count Saint Germain. There is a character in there that actually goes by the Count Saint Germain. And then Calvin says, hello, Odd Mother. Hello, Calvin. We're glad to have you here. And guys, please share out. We do like to spread the creepiness. Sharing is caring. And plus, we like to determine who sees this, not Facebook. All right, so let's see. Mikey says Castlevania. Is that based on the video game? Well, my understanding, and the man behind the curtain might be able to elaborate on it a little bit more, is that I think that the character that is based on Count Saint Germain comes in as far as I think the Netflix episodes, like season 2 or season 3. But yes, Oz, the man behind the curtain, says yes, it is. So yes, I knew there was some character that was somewhat based on him in the game as well. But I haven't played the game, so he could probably answer that better for you. All right, so we're going to start in the mid 1800s, and we're going to focus starting out around somewhere between 1710 and 1750. Again, this is usually where scholars start. Now, little else is known about him up until 1740, when he began to turn up in various historical records as a man who appeared in his mid-40s and moved in fashionable Venice circles, eventually coming into prominence in the high society of Europe sometime around 1742. Now we can go ahead and run the next clip. All right, he arrived in France around 1756 and began to captivate the Parisian elite. He again was noted to be somewhere between 40 and 50 years old. Before arriving in Paris, however, he had caused some attention in London when, in 1745, he had been arrested as a spy for the Bonnie Prince Charlie, also known as the Young Pretender. Now, Horace Walpole wrote, and this is quote, the other day they seized an old man who goes by the name of Count Saint Germain. He has been here these 2 years and will not tell who he is or whence. The Prince of Wales has had unsatisfied curiosity about him, but in vain. Now, a London obsessed with Jacobite plotters and their French sympathizers, he was arrested by the English authorities, accused of having pro-Stuart letters in his possession. He claimed indignity that the letters had been planted on him and was eventually released. Commenting on the case in a letter to Sir Horace Mann, dated the 9th of December of 1745, Horace Walpole, the famous British art historian and esteemed man of letters, wrote the following odd description. He, Saint Germain, has been here, like I said, these 2 years and will not tell who he is or whence, but professes that he does not go by his name or his right name. He also wrote that Saint Germain sings and plays the violin wonderfully, but added that he was mad and not very sensible. Now, Horace Walpole, also known as Horatio Walpole, was the 4th Earl of Orford, also known as Horace Walpole. He was an English writer, an art historian, a man of letters, an antiquarian, so he studied things of the past, and a politician. He had Strawberry Hill House built in Twickenham, southwest London, revived the Gothic style some decades before his Victorian successors, and he was also a member of the British Parliament. So he was no schlub. He beguiled now talking about Saint Germain, he beguiled the royals and the rich with his vast knowledge of science and history, his musical ability, his easy charm and quick wit. He was also extremely cultured, with great knowledge of the arts. It was agreed that he was of noble blood. It has been supposed that Saint Germain was the natural son of the widow of Charles II of Spain. Now, this is kind of going on a side note. Although theosophists, again spiritualists, have made a good case for him being the son of Francis Ragosi II, which was the Prince of Transylvania. Either genealogy would place the year of his birth at about 1690. Now keep that in mind. Try to keep all these dates in mind. The musician Jean-Philippe Rameau was certain, however, that he had met the Count in 1710, which would make him 20 years old. If you go by that date, 1690, 20 years old, under the name of Marquis de Montefort, and stated that he appeared to be in his 40s at the time. So, and you're going to see this kind of an ongoing thing. And we're going to get more into like the speculations and things like that and some other information in part 2, but it's important that you understand the documented history of Count Saint Germain so that you kind of understand the whole story and why it is so up for debate and why he has really had like a presence when it comes to like Hollywood and a lot of other different things. So we can go ahead and we can run the next clip. Now, the Count Saint Germain, he spoke many languages fluently, including French, German, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, English, and was further familiar with Chinese, Latin, Arabic, and he even could like read or understand ancient Greek and Sanskrit. Now, again, the ones he was fluent in, when I say fluent, he was fluent. You had at that time a lot of people that would go around and try to find fakers that were trying to run in noble circles. You see some of that. Anybody that's ever watched My Fair Lady, the guy that was constantly wanting to talk to My Fair Lady to figure out exactly where she came from, there was a lot of people that did that, and it was very dangerous to try to run in noble circles. It wasn't a make it, break it till, or make it till you break it type thing. Like you could be put to death for that. So what it was said about his fluency was that though his French was said to have a bit of Piedmontese, which is a minority Romance language spoken in the northwest of Italy, specifically to the Piedmont regions, it was still acceptable for fluency of French. He was an expert and master of all arts. He could play the violin like a virtuoso. Some say he was the second identity of the famous violinist Giovanni. He composed music, well over 57 documented pieces, and you can find his music on Wiki. He was an accomplished painter. He had perfected a technique for painting jewels in paintings that almost seemed to glow. He also had an extensive knowledge concerning fabric dyes and techniques. He actually made a lot of stride in French fashion and dye techniques. All that combined with his understated elegance made him an ideal party guest for the bored aristocrats. However, he could adjust his intelligence to fit every situation and masterfully hold conversations. The Count, he could speak just as easily to someone that was of peasantry and hold a conversation as he could of someone of royalty or nobility. And like I said, however, he could adjust his intelligence to fit every situation and masterfully hold these conversations. The Count gave two private musical performances in London in April and May of 1749. On one such occasion, Lady Gemma York described how she was very entertained by him or at him the whole time. I mean, she quotes, the oddness of his manner, which is impossible not to laugh at. Otherwise, you know, he's very sensible and well bred in conversation. She also continued, he is an odd creature, and the more I see him, the more curious I am to know something about him. He is everything with everybody. He talks ingeniously with Mr. Ray, uh, philosophy, philosophy with Lord Woodby, and is gallant with Miss York, Miss Carpenter, and all the young ladies. But the character and philosopher is what he seems to pretend to, and to be a good deal conceited of. The others are put on to comply with les marines du monde, but that you are to suppose his real characteristics. I can't but fancy he is a great pretender in all kinds of science, as well as that he really has acquired an uncommon share in some. He was also said to be proficient in medicine and chemistry. And that's the thing about it. Even though not everybody liked him, like really fed into what he was really, you know, everything that he did, they still found him personable. Like they may not like him, but they couldn't help but like him, if that makes any sense. And he prescribed recipes for the removal of face wrinkles and for dyeing hair, which of course made him extremely popular with the ladies of the court. And eventually he became a trusted diplomat of the court of King Louis the 15th of France, also known as Louis the Beloved. Wherever he traveled, he set up an elaborate laboratory to practice what he is best known for, and that is alchemy. Now we're going to go again on a little bit of a side note. The Count had, according to French Marshal de Belle Isle, cured him of a serious illness and was rewarded by being taken to Paris, where the grateful Marshal set him up with an apartment and a laboratory for his alchemy experiments, of which he claimed to be able to fuse several small diamonds into one large one. He also said he could make pearls grow to incredible size. So let's go ahead. We're going to stop really quick for a station identification as well as a word from our sponsor. And then we'll get to some comments, and we're going to get into kind of the alchemy, what he is best known for, and we'll move on from there. We'll be right back.
This is Mikey from Out of the Ordinary, and you're watching PBDC TV.
thing in the morning, when I'm listening to music and getting a little bit of time for some creepy research, I'm always representing with my PBDC merch. What a better way to have a cup of coffee in the morning.
Don't forget to check out our other cool merch at rootsbleedred.com. That's rootsbleedred.com.
This is Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus from Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, and when I'm not hosting Monster Chat or knocking down small Japanese cities, I'm watching PBDC TV. Now back to the show.
And we're here. We're still here. Yay. All right, so let's go ahead and get to some comments really quick, and then we'll finish up with this. All right, so let's see. Lena says, lots of people that were supposedly possessed or sold their soul have supposedly had vast knowledge of the music and arts. In history and science, makes one wonder. It really does. And if you find just what we actually have in history related to this particular person, you're going to really dig next week's episode, because we're going to get into some things. We're going to be getting into some things you're going to find very interesting. And we're going to be touching on that a little bit, actually, this episode. And Selena also says, if we can bring that back up, see, he was an occultist of sorts. He was, and an alchemist. And that's what we're going to get into here in just a minute. And then John Bigg says, Faust. He made a deal with the devil for all his knowledge. This is true. And he could be someone like Faust, or he could be something altogether different. So this is a fun topic. I'm telling you, if you start looking into the Count Saint Germain, you're going to go all over the place. This historical story has so many rabbit holes. It's like a piece of Swiss cheese. And then John says only the upper class even had access to education then. And he must have been born of nobility. We're going to get into that here in just a moment as well, because that is one thing that everyone that met him, even though you did have people in noble courts that were going around trying to find, obvious pretenders, that is one thing they all agreed with, was that he absolutely was of noble blood. Now, whether that title had been stripped of him because of political reasons, or if he was protecting somebody, that could be a possibility. Yes, he was an aristocrat. And it was very, very dangerous to try to fake something and also be a very close friend of the King of France. That is a good way to find your head in a basket. Definitely not something you want to play at. And plus, what we're going to get into as well is alchemy moving into this time period. It could be dangerous. You could be burnt at the stake for certain proportions or certain studies of alchemy. So you really needed to be really careful. You needed to dazzle the ladies. You needed to make high, powerful friends. And you needed to be powerful as well. And that's one thing you kind of see here, is that even though there may have been some people that didn't like him, he was still personable. And he carried an air of authority. People respected him, and we may say even maybe feared him a little bit. So, and that was to his advantage. So let's go ahead and let's get into the alchemy. So what is alchemy? All right. So I know a lot of you guys are really familiar with it, but it's basically blending a very rudimentary and general sense of science, because they really did. Alchemists actually did help science, believe it or not. What we know of as science today, with a spiritual aspect. Okay, so you would apply not only what we know as just like natural science, but it had a spiritual element to it as well. Now it's basically a mystical science that strives to control the elements. The foremost goal of this practice was the creation of projection powder, or the elusive philosopher's stone. And for those of you which are not, familiar with the philosopher's stone, which again was referred to in Harry Potter, known in the U.S. as the sorcerer's stone, in the U.K. it was the philosopher's stone, which it was claimed when added to the molten form of such base metals as lead, you could turn them into pure silver or gold. Furthermore, the magical powder could be used as an elixir that would impart immortality on those who drank it, or almost immortality. If you didn't achieve immortality, you may achieve an extremely long lifespan. Now, beginning around 1720, a rigid distinction began to be drawn for the first time between alchemy and chemistry. Chemistry was the science like we know today. Alchemy was more of the spiritual aspect. Now, by the 1740, alchemy was now restricted to the realm of gold making, leading to the popular belief that alchemists were charlatans and that the tradition itself was nothing more than a fraud. However, like I said, it really did. They're going back now and finding out that even though a lot of the things that were written by alchemists, like basically their cookbooks, so to speak, or their grimoires or what have you, they may have used like fantastical names, but it was like a secret, so that way people didn't come in and steal basically their recipes or their chemistry research. So things would be coded basically. So, and this comes from Smithsonian Magazine. Now, throughout much of the 20th century, the academic community had little patience with alchemists and their vain efforts to transmutate base metals into gold. Now, what we do know now is we can transmutate things. We do it with atomic science all the time. And, atomic reactions and things like that, that is a transmutation. Any contemporary scholar who even dare to write about alchemy, historian Herbert Butterfield Warren, would become tinctured with the kind of lunacy they set out to describe. So in other words, people wouldn't look at you as seriously. But in the 1980s, some revolutionary scholars began to argue that alchemists actually made significant contributions to the development of the science that we know today. Historians of science began deciphering alchemical texts, which wasn't easy. The alchemists obsessed with secrecy, deliberately describing their experiments in metaphorical terms, laden with obscure references to mythology and history. For instance, texts that described a cold dragon who creeps in and out of caves was a code for saltpeter, or known as potassium nitrate. It is a crystalline substance found on cave walls that tastes cool on the tongue, and they actually used to use it to make oh, my mind's gone blank. Corned beef. That's what they used to use. So this painstaking process of decoding allowed researchers for the first time to attempt ambitious alchemical experiments. Lawrence Principal, a chemist and science historian at Johns Hopkins University, cobbled together obscure texts and scraps from the 17th century laboratory notebooks to reconstruct a recipe to grow the philosopher's tree from a seed of gold. Supposedly, this tree was a precursor to the more celebrated and elusive philosopher's stone, which would be able to transmutate metals into gold. The use of gold to make more gold would have seemed entirely logical to alchemists. Principal explains, like using germs of wheat to grow an entire field of wheat. So in other words, if you plant seeds, it will grow an entire field. Principal specifically prepared mercury and gold into a buttery lump at the bottom of a flask. He then buried the sealed flask in a heated sand bath in his laboratory. One morning, Principal came into the lab to discover, to his utter disbelief, that the flask was filled with a glittering and fully formed tree of gold. The mixture of metals had grown upward into a structure resembling coral or the branching canopy of a tree minus the leaves. So think of like when you were younger and you could do those like grow crystals in the water. That's what I picture in my mind. What intrigued Principal and his fellow historians, though, is the growing evidence that the alchemists seem to have performed legitimate experiments, manipulated and analyzed the material world in interesting ways, and reported genuine results. And many of the great names in the canon of modern science took note, says William Newman, a historian at Indiana's University in Bloomington. And we'll go ahead and run the clip. I forgot to do it while we're talking, so we can go ahead and run the next clip. Unless I said to run the next clip earlier. God, I can't remember. Just run it and I'll see if we've already. Okay, yeah, you can go ahead and run that. That's good. So there's your alchemist doing his thing. Maybe I should have ran that while I was talking. Let's see if we can go ahead and skip to the, yeah, there's another one with alchemist symbols, as well as the Rosicrucian. We're going to get into Rosicrucians here in a moment as well. And we're going to really get into secret societies next week because he is linked to a lot of secret societies. All right, awesome. Okay, so now we can run the next clip. You'd think we'd have this down now. I'm the one that always seems to booger it up. All right, so though always tastefully dressed, old money, we should say, he loved jewels, and much of his clothing, including his shoes, were studded with them. One evening he appeared at court, and this is kind of a side note, at court with shoe buckles, which Herr von Gonot, an expert on precious stones, estimated at 200,000 francs. He seemed to be a man of great wealth, but was not known to have any bank account. If it was due to his ability to transmutate base metals into gold, he never performed the feat for observers. Now, there are also links to the Medici family, and we're going to get into them in just a minute. So this could have been where some of his money came from. Now, while the exact date of Saint Germain's birth remains unknown, he himself stated, and the known facts supporting his contention, that he was the son of Franz Leopold, Prince Zorgozi of Transylvania, and Princess Charlotte Amelia of Hesse-Weinfried, who were married in 1694. And again, he was supposedly born in 1690. So that's another riddle there. Now, going back to kind of the Medici family, now the Ragozis basically, like Prince Ragozi II, well, King Ragozi the first of Transylvania, kind of tried to oust the Austrian king, and there was a really big back and forth. They lost, of course, well, the Ragozis did, but they were able to kind of wiggle out of it by giving the Austrian king some of their castles and things like that, because they were such large landowners. And his great-grandmother, Saint Germain's great-grandmother, basically had some familiar family ties with the Austrian family, so they were able to basically save the first Ragozi from being executed, along with a lot of the other landowners that rose up in the rebellion with the first King Ragozi. They were all executed, but he was not. So Ragozi II comes along, and it's basically kind of just history repeating itself. They started a rebellion with Austria, and it's basically they just wanted to be in control of their own land. They didn't want to be dictated from a faraway king. And like I said, he was powerful in and of himself. He was eventually exiled because of that second uprising that his father had started before him. And this is where kind of the ties to the Medici family come from. Now, they were a family in Italy, I believe Tuscany, if I'm not mistaken. And they were extremely powerful, to the point that they had generated three popes and two regent queens of France. So extremely powerful family. Now, their reign did kind of start coming to an end about the time that supposedly Count Saint Germain was sent away because his father was exiled and all this kind of stuff. So this could have been not only why he may seem very obscure about a lot of his like history for himself, because he may have been protecting, certain family members, things like that. And that could explain where maybe some of his money came from. But as far as anybody knew, he didn't have bank accounts. He just received what were they called? Like transcripts of money every so often that would keep him, well financed. Now, after his brother had been taken prisoner, this is talking about Prince Ragozzi II of Transylvania, by the Austrians. His parents had died. He was brought up by talking about Saint Germain, was brought up by the executor of his father's will. Now, this is another story, because there's a lot of different stories related to his past, and that's one of the things that kind of makes it hard to follow him prior to like between 1710 and 1750. But supposedly he was raised by the Duc de Bourbon and the Duc de Domaine and the Count of Charlene and Tussauds, and through them was introduced to the courts of Europe as someone of princely blood and almost royal descent. According to the historical work in Illustrated Italiano by Cesare Cantu, librarian of the Great Library in Milan, when this particular embodiment of Saint Germain came of age, he was educated at the University of Siena, which is kind of another link with the Medicinis, and traveled a lot in Italy and Spain, and was greatly protected by the last Grand Duke of Tuscany, again, which would more than likely be a Medici, and eventually inherited his father's considerable legacy, which may be why he never seemed to need money. He dined often with his friends because he enjoyed their company. We're speaking of the Count Saint Germain again, but he was rarely seen to eat food in public. Often he drank an undisclosed liquid. Now, there's some debate on what this liquid was. Some say it could have been a form of powdered gold, which actually there is a therapeutic drink of gold that has been ionized in a particular way that we can do now. The only way they could do it back then was to harness lightning. So, and they were able to do it. But it's often been debated exactly what this liquid was that he was drinking. And he is said to sustain himself only on a diet of oatmeal. But again, he didn't eat in public. Very rarely did he eat in front of anyone. It may have been his extraordinary learnedness that led acquaintances to see that he was a remarkable man, but an antidote from 1760 most likely gave rise to the notion that Saint Germain could be immortal. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll run the next clip, and then after this section, we'll get to the comments. So in Paris that year, Countess von Gregory heard that Count Saint Germain had arrived for a soirée at the home of Madame de Pompadour. She was the mistress of King Louis XV of France. And actually, he's kind of a handsome man, but you wonder if he really actually looked like that. The elderly countess was curious because she had known a Count Saint Germain while in Venice in 1710. Upon meeting the Count again, she was astonished to see that he hadn't appeared to age, and asked him if he was his father, or if his father was the one that she knew in Venice. He replied, "No, madame." But I myself was living in Venice at the end of the last and the beginning of the last century. I had the honor to pay you court then. Forgive me, but that is impossible, the perplexed countess stated. The Countess Saint Germain I knew in those days was at least 45 years old, and you at the outside are that age at present. Madame, I am very old, he said with a knowing smile. But when you must be then you must be nearly 100 years old, said the astonished countess. That is not impossible, the count told her matter-of-factly. But then, when the stunned countess said, he must be a devil, Saint Germain trembled violently, told her not to use such terms, and fled the room. Now, a side note, a possible substation for Saint Germain's claim that he was the man known to the much younger Countess von Gregory in the 1670s was recorded by Baron Charles Henry de Gletchen, a Danish diplomat. In his published memoirs, Baron Gletchen stated that the composer Philip Renou and a relative of the French ambassador to Venice had both assuredly met him when he was known at the time as Monsieur de Saint Germain in the early 1700s, when, according to them, he appeared to be the man of about 50. The Baron also confirmed that Saint Germain had a fondness for unusual diamonds when, in the same memoirs, he wrote, he showed me some remarkable things, a great number of colored brilliants, and other stones of unusual size and perfection. I thought I was seeing the treasures of the fabled cave of jewels. However, not everyone was taken in by Saint Count Germain. And we're going to get into that here in just a moment. Let's go ahead and see what's going on in the comments. And I know I am butchering French. I do not speak French well at all. All right, and so Maud says they had all that pasta money. All that pasta money. Yes, they were extremely, the Medici family was extremely, extremely powerful. So yes, he was the first hipster. Yes. Yes. And that's the thing. He was definitely, high society, but he wasn't a dandy. You could tell the difference between new money and old money. Like, new money didn't understand fashion. It was just what was expensive. They were usually very flamboyant. His, even though he wore a lot of jewels on his clothing, was very reserved in how he dressed. And then I was calling you Lena. I'm sorry. Lana says it was whiskey so he could handle the stupid of the times. Probably, it could have been. It could have been. Now we're going to get into some things next week that might leave that liquid up to some question. And then Mom says, I think that might require something stronger, maybe some absinthe spiked with opium. That very well could have as well. All right, so like I said, not everyone was taken in by the Count. Now, whether he was a genius or a charlatan, Count Germain had the talent to make himself noticed and the subject of gossip. But in Versailles and Paris, he was embraced as the confidential advisor of, like I said, Louis XV. The position earned him the envy and enmity of the king's ministers, who denounced him as an adventurer with a smooth line of talk. And we can go ahead and run the next clip. Now, he shows up next in 1760 and is referred to in memoirs by someone you'll recognize. Count Saint Germain, while performing a diplomatic function, met the famous lover and womanizer Casanova. Casanova later said of Saint Germain, This extraordinary man who would say in an easy, assured manner that he was easily 300 years old, that he knew the secrets of the universal medicine, and that he possessed a mastery over nature, that he could melt diamonds, all this, he said, were mere trifles to him. Now, the legendary lover Casanova was utterly convinced, however, that the Count was a fake. In his memoirs, he referred to him as the king of impostors and quacks. He accused him of barefaced lies and manifold, basically being very eccentric. Nevertheless, even he said he found it hard to take offense at him, saying that he never ceased to be astonished by him. Now, after this particular situation, kind of moving back into the storyline, matters came to a head in 1760, when the court, at the behest of the king, involved himself, or I should say Count Germain, involved himself in foreign affairs, going behind the back of the ministry. So in other words, the king asked him to go take care of certain diplomatic things in other words, behind the back of the king's advisors and ministries. And that really didn't set well with them once they found out. Now, eventually, Count Saint Germain was threatened with arrest. He was obliged to flee to England, where he stayed for a while. Now, sequentially, a London Chronicle, Article 3 of the 3rd of January of 1760, which was mainly concerned with Saint Germain, then widely reported eternal youth, stated, "No one now doubts it, though at first it was thought to be pure fantasy. In fact, everyone believes that, among other things, he knows of panacea, which is basically another word. It's kind of an old English word for remedy, for all the diseases, and is able to overcome old age." Now, what this proves so far is that Saint Germain definitely again existed, though he was very odd indeed. Throughout the 18th century, Count Saint Germain continued to use his seamlessly endless knowledge of the world in both politics and social intrigue of the European elite. And oddly enough, Count Saint Germain always seemed to be in the right place at the right time, right before something historical happened. And from some of the information that I understand and have read, is basically he was always somewhere right before something happened, or he might help to bring it along if he could bring it along in a peaceful manner. He was about doing things, moving people along in a peaceful manner. Now, we can go ahead and we can run the next clip. And we're going to go over just a little bit. In 1762, he took part in the deposition of Peter III of Russia, which would bring Catherine the Great to the throne. So he basically helped dethrone Peter III of Russia in order to bring in Catherine the Great. Now, a year later, he was known to be carrying out further alchemical experiments in his laboratory in the Renaissance chateau at Chambord, which is basically a summer castle of Louis XV right there, and had put at his which the king had put at his disposal in 1758. Other guests in the chateau at the time included the Princess of Alta Zerbst, who was mother of Catherine II of Russia, the Marquis de Jouffroy, Baron de Gletchen, Madame de Gillis, all of whom mentioned Saint Germain's experiments in their letters and memoirs. So again, you have historical references that are in black and white, written hand, of the things that occurred. The following year, he was living in Holland under the name of Count Sermont, where he established another laboratory in which he made paint and dyes, as well as continuing his alchemical experiments. After disappearing from Holland with supposedly about 100,000 guilders, he materialized in Belgium, this time calling himself the Marquis de Montefrat again. And there in Tourani, he set up another laboratory. Now, in 1768, he turned up again in Russia in the court of Catherine the Great, whom he had previously helped to bring to the throne. Now, according to Count Orlov, who was the head of the Russian imperial forces, he was an invaluable, speaking of Count Saint Germain, was an invaluable diplomat and palace advisor during the Russian-Turkish War of 1768 to 1770, which Russia won. As a reward, he was made a high-ranking officer in the Russian army, a position he took under the ironic English alias of General Well Done. But instead of reaping the benefits of his prestigious position at the end of the war, he chose instead to leave Russia. And we can go ahead and run the next clip. He then returned to France briefly in 1774 and warned Louis XVI and his queen, Marie Antoinette, of the impending storm they faced. The Count was quoted as saying, and these are in memoirs, "There will be a bloodthirsty republic whose scepter will be the executioner's knife." Now, if you read some of the family journals and things like that in Isabella Oakley Cooper's book, which, like I said, it's a really, really good book. If you read those, and we can stop right here. If you read those, she, like I said, the families were allowed her to copy those. He almost got in trouble in Louis XVI's court for telling them this. Marie Antoinette became very agitated, and if it hadn't have been for the fact that Saint Germain was such good friends with King Louis's father, he would have probably been thrown in the dungeon, so to speak. So if you want to look into that more, there's a lot more backstory there. Now, in 1779, he then appeared in Hamburg, Germany, where he befriended Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel. And it's not the Prince Charles, the King of England. This was basically Hesse-Kassel in Eccleford was kind of a province of what is known now as Hamburg, Germany. So for the next 5 years, and let's see. Where were we at? Okay, we can go ahead and run the next, or that clip we were running. I'm sorry. All right, so in 1779, again, he appeared in Hamburg, Germany, where he befriended Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel. For the next 5 years, he lived as a guest in the Prince's Castle at Eccleford, which again is a province now of today's Hamburg, Germany, and carried out more alchemical experiments as well as studying Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. Now, he was already within the Freemason Brotherhood, as well as some other ones, which, if I understand correctly, the Rosicrucians at the time were kind of like you had the Freemasons, and then within the Freemasons, kind of like you have the Shriners, you also had the Rosicrucians. If I'm not mistaken, that's how I understand it. If you are a Mason and you are here in the comments, let me know. So he was just basically doing further studies as far as Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. And according to local records, this is the area and the castle where Saint Germain died. He has been linked, again, kind of going on a side note, he has been linked to several secret societies, including the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, the Society of the Asiatic Brothers, the Knights of Light. There's not really, some people say the Illuminati, but there's not really any real documentation on the Illuminati. He, however, has been linked to the Order of the Templars, among others. Now, going back to the main story, the parish records in the Catholic Church of Eccleford say that Count Saint Germain died on the 27th of February of 1784 and was buried locally. kind of a side note there, if you remember earlier, a lot of people thought because of how well Count Saint Germain played the violin that he actually may have been the second identity of the famous Giovanni. Well, Giovanni died in 1782. Supposedly, Saint Germain died in 1784. So the timeline there it's workable. Now, although Saint Germain's burial is recorded, a great deal of mystery surrounds his death. For a start, he was reported to have died when his good friend Prince Charles, again of Germany, or Eccleford, which is now part of Germany, was not there. Basically, he was in another area. The Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, he was absent from his normal home, which was the home that he shared with Count Saint Germain. And supposedly there were only 2 nameless women in attendance when Saint Germain died. Now, to deepen the mystery, Prince Charles then burned all of Saint Germain's supposedly invaluable papers. And this is in Prince Charles's memoirs. In his own words, lest they be misinterpreted. And much like the Somerton Man, so if you're not familiar with the Somerton Man, check it out. It's a big mystery. What was left behind was very curious and somewhat similar to the Somerton Man. So Jean Overton Fuller found during her research that the Count's estate upon his death was as follows: a pack of paid and receipted bills and quittances, so basically receipts, 20 or 82 rich thalers and 13 shillings, so basically cash, 29 various groups of items of clothing. This included gloves, stockings, trousers, shirts, etc. 14 linen shirts, 8 other groups of linen items, and of various sundries, including a razor, buckles, toothbrush, sunglasses, comb, etc. However, there was no alchemical laboratory equipment, no diamonds, no jewels, no gold, or any other riches were listed, nor were kept cultural items from travels, such as his violin, or any notes and correspondences that could lead to giving some information on his past that he kept very secretive, even with his closest friends. Now, on the 3rd of April the same year, the mayor and the city council of Eckeford issued an official proclamation on the auctioning off of the Count's remaining effects in case no living relative would appear within a designated time period to lay claim to them. Prince Charles donated the factory to the crown, which supposedly was where Saint Germain did a lot of his alchemy experiments. And it was later converted into a hospital. Now, if this was true, going by dates and assuming that Saint Germain was about 50 years old in 1710, it makes him, at the time when he died, to be over 130 years old. Now, some evidence does show that he even told his friend Prince Charles, that when I came to live with you, I was 88 years old, and he lived for 5 years. So that would put him very close to 100, which if you think about it in the times, that was living a long time, as most people were lucky to see their 50th birthday. Now, again, if dates are true, that would have made him somewhere between 100 and 130 years old when he died, assuming he did die. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. So I know it was really deep. I know we were going all over the place. I hope you enjoyed it. I know these deep dives aren't for everybody, but I find them fascinating. Now, next week, we're going to get more into the fantastical. We're going to go kind of into the secret societies, and where we might be today in all this. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let's see what's going on with the comments. I know we're running behind just a little bit. And then Mikey says, I'm sure Hexus knows the count. You never know. You never know. And then Maud says, know him. He owes me $20. I'd at least like to get a big fat diamond out of him, you know? So, all right, guys. Well, I will see you guys next week. Again, next week is going to be more into the fantastical, which is, I think, what a lot of people really, really enjoy. But you've got to understand the past in order to understand where we're coming from on some of the really fun stuff. And then Keisha says, I loved it. Can't wait for part 2. Well, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then Maud says, that was a lot of money back then. Yeah, just to wear on your shoes. Your shoes were covered in, or the buckles were covered in diamonds, and it was 200,000 francs at the time. That is craziness. And then John says, fascinating show, Mother. Can't wait till next week. Well, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Like I said, it was a really deep dive. It's a really, it's kind of a complicated subject. So I tried to make it as easily understood as possible. And I think I did a fairly good job on it. So, but next week will be fun. Yes. And pleasant nightmares to you as well, John. Well, thank you, Calvin. And guys, I hope you have a great weekend. And we will see you next week. Pleasant nightmares, guys. Bye.
It's that time, kids. Hold on to your heads. Join Psychomantium 13. Each week for thrills, chills, and a horrific good time. Don't lose your heads. Join Psychomantium 13 and enter the weird.